the China strategy when it comes to making and creating their own chips, independent chips industry,
Exactly.
and obtaining this tech sovereignty that is a major goal for them within the next 10 or so years.
Absolutely.
So that will be up. Stay tuned.
Very interesting. We've seen China's driven the copper market over the past couple of weeks. Hello out there and welcome to GeoPortfolio. We're back after a small hiatus over the Easter holidays. And we're going to talk a lot about Israel, Iran, China, and all else that matters to your portfolio. Remember that you can read all our content and our full analysis on stenresearch.com. We offer a broad package of macro analysis, data analysis, and geopolitical analysis, all relevant to your portfolio and all actionable, so you can actually trade the ideas that we propose. With me today, I have once more my great colleague Anne, live from Paris. How are you, Anne?
I'm good. Have you enjoyed your break, if you had one?
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. That's one thing about us Danes. We're good at taking breaks, and so we did over the Easter.
Until our government cuts our breaks.
Yeah, that's very, very true. That's a story for another day. Anyway, lots to talk about, and we'll get right on to some of the current topics that I covered in my editorial this week. So my headline was Israel running out of friends, China growing friendships. The China part we'll get a little bit back to, but let's just touch upon Israel, because obviously Israel is carrying on their offensive into Gaza. They are destroying one hospital after another, and they're still poised to attack the last stronghold city of Rafah. The civilian casualties are enormous. The struggles of the civilian population is enormous, and to me, it seems like Israel is really losing a lot of its friends, especially in the West. And the thing is that the Palestinians can stomach to lose support in the West. Hamas hasn't really gained any support in the West, but they can stomach that because they're gaining support in the Middle East. Israel is losing support all across the board, and that's a major issue for them, I think. We're now looking at and getting a lot of questions on the tensions between Iran and Israel, specifically here today, Thursday. Israel, a couple of days ago, bombed the Iranian embassy in Syria, killing a number of Iranian military commanders. So we're getting a lot of questions on, could this lead to outright war between Iran and Israel? What are we looking at? In my opinion, my best estimation is that Iran is going to respond to those attacks within 1, 2, 3 days. But let's remember how Iran typically responds to these types of attacks. We've seen it in their exchanges with the US and Pakistan earlier this year. So first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that Iran usually responds tit for tat, or eye for an eye. What does that mean? Well, geography. This was not an attack directly on Iranian soil. It was not an attack directly on a major Iranian city. So most likely Iran will try and strike back at Israel outside of Israel's native territory, or at least outside of major Iranian cities. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an eye for an eye. The target type, well, this was an Iranian embassy. It's a high-profile target, but it wasn't a military target per se. Although military commanders were hit, so it was somewhat of a military target, but not a direct strike at Iranian military installations. However, it wasn't a strike on a proxy group, which we've also seen, which would be even lighter. So how is Iran going to respond to this? Well, it wouldn't make sense to target Israeli proxies across the Middle East. That wouldn't be an eye for an eye. It wouldn't make sense to strike directly at the Israeli army. That wouldn't be an eye for an eye. So I think we'll land somewhere in between, perhaps some command points or some settlements outside of Israel's borders, either in Gaza, perhaps on the border to Lebanon. That's the most likely response. Then there's importance. We know that Iran issued a heavy response when the US killed Qasem Soleimani a couple of years ago. He was the most important target outside of perhaps the mullahs down there, or the priests running the country. But this is also relatively high importance. I mean, an embassy has a huge symbolic value. You know that from Paris, and whenever you go to the Danish embassy, it's a little bit of Denmark that you're visiting. So this is an important target for Iran. I think they will try and respond If they can't by hitting high-ranking Israeli military officials or intelligence officials, it's going to be tough to hit those. But those are my expectations. Most importantly, I think Iran will respond an eye for an eye, tit for tat. And if Israel doesn't want to escalate this further, that could be the end of this circle of escalation. We're not used to seeing Iran escalate things directly when attacked. So that was just a little answer for those of you asking about Israel Iran. The conflict is, of course, still the Gaza Israel conflict is of course still of major importance. It's a major thing even in the West, and I'm sure you're feeling that in Paris as well, and demonstration, etc., going on, mostly in
Yeah,
support for
major,
Palestine.
major. I guess my question to you, and
Mm.
I assume a lot of viewers would be interested to know that your immediate gut feeling is then it's not going to be a major intensifications of attack in the Red Sea then out of this.
That could be another way to strike, but I would expect that the Iranians attack themselves because this was an attack on Iran. It wasn't an attack on an Iranian proxy group. So Iran should, if my theory holds, respond by itself, by its own drones or missiles. That's also what makes this dangerous, of course, is that this is not the Houthis attacking another Israeli-backed group in Yemen. This is direct confrontation between the two nations' militaries. But let's see. I'm pretty hopeful. I think Iran has done a good job, if you can say that, of managing the conflicts they've had with the U.S. and Pakistan over the past couple of months. They've been attacked. They've attacked back, and that was the end of things. So let's see if the Israelis speak the same language here. I mentioned China a little bit earlier. We've been covering China extensively. We'll continue to do so. I was looking a lot at the visits that they've been having from Indonesia, which is one of the major third party or non-aligned countries out there. The Chinese are working heavily to influence the newly elected Indonesian government. Meanwhile, I know, Anne, you're brewing on an article on the chips war. Could you just
Yeah.
add a few sentences? Yeah,
Speaking of tit for tat,
yeah.
Iran is not the only country playing that game for sure. Yeah. I suspect um, actually a video explainer will be up
Mm,
in a few days' time about the China strategy when it comes to making and creating their own chips, independent chips industry,
exactly.
and obtaining this tech sovereignty that is a major goal for them within the next 10 or so years. So
Absolutely.
that will be up. Stay tuned.
Very interesting. We've we've seen China's driven the copper market over the past couple of weeks. It seems like they're hoarding a lot of copper, and of course in the West we're completely in the blank as to what's going on. Are they preparing for increased demand for copper? Are they holding while prices are low and they expect prices to rise? We don't know. A lot of investors are trying to jump aboard the copper train in some sort of conjecture as to these to the motives behind the Chinese. I think you'll be having some interesting points on that end. So let's stay tuned for that. Maybe talk a little bit about it next week. Just one follow up that we've received a couple of questions on as well is you posted a great article, Anne, on the three phases of Chinese consumer pessimism. We talked about it a little bit last time. Since then we released the article. Um, so overall, we're looking at, just to sort of frame the discussion here. We're looking at a Chinese uptick or a Chinese reacceleration, perhaps driven by the reacceleration we've seen in the U.S. economy. The thing is, two things, that the Chinese are still struggling with the real estate sector, and the Chinese are still struggling with transforming into more of a consumer-centric economy. And you wrote this article, in, and I don't know if you want to jump straight into the three actual phases that you put up, Min, Wei, and Chen.
I could start by
Yeah.
saying that what the article in essence is trying to explain is that China's long-term growth strategy is transforming into an economy more driven by domestic consumption, right?
Mm.
And maybe at the surface level, they should have the factors are there to make that transition, especially right now. Things are going better than I have, certainly during the pandemic. They're trying to get out of this deflationary spiral they've been in. Yet consumer sentiment is still far behind what we see in the West, for example. which is obviously a huge problem when you're trying to create a consumer-driven economy, right?
Absolutely.
And my thesis in this piece essentially is to say that because the real estate sector is still faring like so behind, essentially, real estate prices outside Shanghai and Beijing is still plummeting, and traditionally, especially the older generation, have tied a lot of their funds, their retirement funds, in real estate. Um, Home ownership in China is in the 90s, way higher than we see here in Europe, for example, because there has historically been a skepticism towards other investment opportunities like stocks, for example. So it wasn't uncommon for a Chinese person in their 50s and 60s right now to have multiple properties, even. And obviously, when those plummet in price, what do they have to live off now that they're hitting retirement age? So that has been acting like a huge wet cloth on Chinese consumer sentiment, and it has limited people's spending habits, changed them, like cut down on especially luxury products. We saw Gucci recently published record bad revenue from China. Um, and also it means that people are saving up more money. So private savings are on the rise. Again, a big problem for a country who's trying to transform into a domestic consumer driven economy.
Absolutely.
So
And I think, and maybe let's just round off because I really love that part of the article. The three phases called Min, Wei, and Chen. So these are obviously fictional. These are not actual Chinese that we've been talking to, but they could very well have been. So just to run these over, we'll have them on the screen here. First and foremost, we have the property owner called Min, bought in the 1970s, and she's perhaps one of your final points was the retiree who's been investing his or her fortunes in the real estate sector. Could just put a few words to Min. What's her situation?
yeah, that generation is kind of the first generation who got to experience the Chinese boom, like the golden generation in manufacturing, and now they're hitting retirement age, and they have traditionally again had low trust in, for example, stocks. So whatever fortune they've been able to accumulate during their working life, has a lot of it has gone to real estate, essentially, because like they witnessed in their own towns, like the state sponsored development projects and just more and more yeah, properties was just being built around them, and rent was skyrocketing, right? So in their mind, obviously, it's a surefire bet to invest money in there until it wasn't. Starting 2022 with the crackdowns from the Chinese government. So these people have been very severely hit by the Evergrande crack, for example, and in general, just plummeting house prices.
Absolutely, and they're of course highly influential politically often across the country. This group, and let's move on to Wei. Wei is Gen Z, just like you, Anne, I suppose. 23 years old, born under the one China policy. What's his situation like?
Well, part of the reason why rents are coming down is because there are more properties available than there are takers, and these new takers, the Gen Z generation coming out of university, first of all, there's not a lot of jobs for them to be had. Like youth unemployment, as many probably know, is very high at the moment in China for new university graduates who probably want to buy a house but can't really afford it without a stable job. And secondly, because it's generations born after the one child policy, there's just simply fewer people, right? So that all adds to the downward spiral in prices in real estate.
Absolutely. And finally, we have Chen, 38-year-old construction worker from the rural areas. Um, he was one of the I mean the picture of the Chinese boom has been these rural the peasants moving into the big cities. What's Chen doing?
Well, it just goes to say how much the real estate sector in China just brands out and affect really all aspects of the economy. Development used to be a major driver of GDP in China, and obviously that's not the approach that China is taking anymore. So jobs are fewer for people of Chen's peers of Chen, and China, the state, is trying to transfer this sector of workers over to new, maybe more higher value sectors, like especially EVs and green tech and chips, of course. But obviously, this transition takes time and reskilling, and it's not as easy. But it's to explain that a lot of people who had work coming from the development sector is also struggling a bit.
Yes. So I guess Chin is a picture of how, or an image of how China's trying to move up the value chain, basically. And in the future, we will most likely see more construction workers coming in from abroad to aid the Chinese construction sector, just as we're seeing in Europe. And that's, of course, a very, very tricky development, especially because it's going so rapidly. So very, very nice. And I urge all of you to go in and check the article. We've just made it free for everyone to read, and we'll put a link in the description here. So go in there, check out Anne's great piece, and keep a lookout for your chips war piece, also covering China. That's going to be really interesting. And I think that was pretty much it for this week. We'll be back next week with another couple of great topics. Great seeing you, Anne. I hope you're still doing well in Paris. We'll see you next week.
You too.
Great. Thanks for watching.